The abandoned stable smelled of old hay and forgotten dreams when Emma Chen first pushed open its weathered door. 4 crying babies clutched against her chest, and a small lamb trailing behind her like a faithful shadow. What she didn't know was that the man who would find her there at dawn would change everything she thought she knew about home, family, and the courage it takes to start over. The interstate stretched endlessly ahead of Emma Chen's battered minivan as the autumn rain hammered against the windshield with relentless fury. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. In the back seat, 4 6-month-old babies wailed in unison, their cries piercing through the storm like sirens of distress. Beside her in the passenger seat, a small white lamb named Clover bleated softly, her dark eyes reflecting the same exhaustion that Emma felt deep in her bones. 3 weeks ago, Emma had been living what everyone thought was the perfect life in suburban Denver. She had been the devoted wife of Marcus Chen, a successful pharmaceutical executive, and the proud mother of quadruplets that had made headlines when they were born. The local news had dubbed them Denver's miracle babies, and Emma had smiled for every camera, posed for every photographer, and graciously accepted every congratulation while privately drowning in the overwhelming reality of caring for 4 infants simultaneously. The lamb had been Marcus's idea, a publicity stunt he'd orchestrated to capitalize on their newfound fame. "Think of the image," he'd said with that calculating smile she'd grown to despise. "The nurturing mother with her babies and their pet lamb. We could get a book deal, maybe even a reality show." Clover had arrived as a tiny bottle-fed orphan, and while Marcus saw dollar signs, Emma had seen something else entirely. A creature as vulnerable and dependent as her own children, something pure in a world that suddenly felt contaminated by greed and manipulation. Everything had unraveled when Emma discovered the truth about Marcus's miracle fertility treatments. The experimental drugs he'd been secretly administering to her hadn't just resulted in quadruplets. They were part of an illegal human trial that had put both her and her babies at risk. Worse still, he'd been documenting everything, selling their private medical information to pharmaceutical companies, and planning to use their story as the foundation for an empire built on exploitation. The night she'd confronted him with the evidence she'd found hidden in his home office, Marcus had shown his true colors. The charming public persona had vanished, replaced by a cold stranger who spoke of their children as assets and their marriage as a brand partnership. When Emma threatened to expose everything, he'd laughed and reminded her that no one would believe her word against his. After all, who would suspect that the devoted father of miracle babies was actually a monster in disguise? That same night, while Marcus was at another one of his business dinners that Emma now suspected were meetings with his co-conspirators, she'd packed everything she could carry, loaded the babies and Clover into her minivan, and disappeared into the darkness. She'd been driving ever since, using cash only, avoiding main highways and sleeping in rest stops when exhaustion became too overwhelming to continue. Now, as she navigated the winding mountain roads of rural Wyoming, Emma felt the weight of her situation pressing down on her like the storm clouds overhead. She had maybe $300 left, formula for perhaps 2 more days, and no plan beyond putting as much distance as possible between her family and the man who had betrayed them all. The baby's crying intensified, and Emma's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Lucy, the oldest by 7 minutes, had developed a particular shriek that could penetrate any sound barrier. James, the only boy, had a way of setting off his sisters like dominoes. When he cried, they all cried. Sophie, delicate and often sickly, had been running a low fever for 2 days that made Emma's heart race with worry. And little Grace, the youngest and smallest, had barely been eating, her tiny face growing more pinched with each passing hour. "I know babies," Emma whispered, her voice hoarse from exhaustion and unshed tears. "Mama's trying to find us somewhere safe. Just hold on a little longer." Clover made a soft sound and pressed her small head against Emma's arm, as if sensing her distress. The lamb had become an unexpected source of comfort during their desperate flight, somehow understanding that silence and stillness were required when they stopped to rest, and offering wordless companionship when the darkness felt too heavy to bear alone. Thunder rolled across the sky, and Emma realized she could barely see the road ahead through the torrential rain. Her fuel gauge hovered dangerously close to empty, and she hadn't seen a gas station or any sign of civilization for nearly an hour. The mountain road twisted and turned through dense forest, offering no shoulders to pull over on, and no respite from the storm. As if sensing her desperation, the minivan began to sputter. The engine coughed once, twice, then died completely, leaving Emma coasting in the darkness with only her headlights to guide her. She managed to steer the vehicle around a bend and spotted what looked like a dirt driveway leading to some kind of structure barely visible through the trees. With no other options, Emma turned onto the narrow track, praying it would lead to help rather than deeper into the wilderness. The driveway wound through tall pines and over a small wooden bridge before opening into a clearing where the silhouettes of several buildings stood against the stormy sky. A farmhouse sat dark and quiet in the distance, but closer to the road stood a large wooden structure that Emma's city-bred eyes recognized as a barn or stable. The minivan rolled to a complete stop just as Emma reached the stable doors. She sat for a moment, listening to the rain pound on the roof and the increasingly frantic cries of her children. Clover had begun to pace anxiously in the passenger seat, her small hooves clicking against the worn upholstery. Emma knew she had to make a decision. She could sit in the van and hope someone would find them in the morning, or she could take the risk of seeking shelter in what appeared to be an abandoned building. The baby's cries made the choice for her. They needed warmth, dryness, and her full attention, none of which she could provide while trapped in the confines of the minivan. Moving with the efficiency born of desperate necessity, Emma gathered the babies two at a time, wrapping them in blankets and rushing them through the rain to the stable door. The heavy wooden portal was unlocked, swinging open to reveal a space that was dark but blessedly dry. She made 2 trips, carrying Lucy and James first, then returning for Sophie and Grace while Clover followed faithfully behind, shaking the rain from her woolly coat. The stable was larger than it had appeared from outside, with high ceilings and a row of empty stalls lining each wall. Moonlight filtered through cracks in the wooden walls, providing just enough illumination for Emma to navigate the space safely. The air smelled of old hay and leather, with an underlying earthiness that spoke of animals and honest work. Emma found a pile of relatively clean hay in one of the larger stalls and quickly created a makeshift bed, spreading her jacket over the straw and arranging the babies on top of it. They were still crying, but the sound seemed less desperate now that they were out of the cold and wet. Clover immediately curled up beside them, her warm body providing additional comfort and protection. With shaking hands, Emma retrieved bottles and formula from her bag, warming them against her own body heat before feeding each baby in turn. The familiar routine of feeding brought a small measure of calm to the chaos of their situation. Lucy latched on eagerly, her dark eyes watching Emma's face with an intensity that seemed far too mature for a 6-month-old. James fussed but eventually settled, his small fist wrapping around Emma's finger as he drank. Sophie took her bottle slowly, her fever making her listless and unresponsive, while Grace barely managed a few ounces before falling into an exhausted sleep. As the babies finally quieted, Emma allowed herself to really look at their surroundings for the first time. The stable was clearly still in use. The stalls were clean, the hay was fresh, and she could see evidence of recent activity in the form of grooming tools, hanging neatly on hooks, and feed buckets stacked in organized rows. Someone cared for this place, which meant someone would eventually return to it. The thought should have frightened her, but instead Emma felt a strange sense of relief. For 3 weeks, she had been running blind, driven by panic and the need to protect her children from a man who saw them as commodities rather than human beings. She had been strong because she'd had no choice, but now, surrounded by the smell of hay and the soft sounds of her sleeping babies, she finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her exhaustion. Emma lay down beside her children, pulling them close to her body for warmth. Clover positioned herself like a guardian at their feet, her ears alert for any sound of danger. Through the cracks in the stable walls, Emma could see that the storm was beginning to pass, the rain softening to a gentle patter, and the thunder moving off into the distance. For the first time in weeks, she felt something approaching peace. They were dry, they were warm, and they were together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, and new decisions to make, but tonight they were safe. Emma closed her eyes and let sleep take her, one hand resting protectively on her babies, and the other extended toward Clover, connecting them all in a circle of love and desperation. She dreamed of fields of green grass where her children could run free, where Clover could graze without fear, where the sound of approaching footsteps meant help rather than danger. In her dream, there was a voice calling her name, warm and gentle, promising safety and understanding. She reached toward that voice, toward the promise of home it seemed to offer, but woke before she could see the face it belonged to. Dawn was breaking when the sound of boots on wooden planks penetrated Emma's consciousness. She jerked awake, immediately alert and protective, pulling her babies closer as footsteps approached their makeshift sanctuary. Clover had risen to her feet, positioned between Emma and the sound, her small body tense, but not afraid. "Hello?" a deep voice called out, concern evident in the tone. "Is someone in here?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma's heart pounded as she tried to decide whether to answer or hope that whoever it was would leave without discovering them. The babies were still sleeping, their faces peaceful in the morning light that streamed through the stable windows, and she didn't want to wake them unless absolutely necessary. The footsteps stopped directly outside their stall, and Emma found herself looking up into the most striking pair of green eyes she had ever seen. They belonged to a man who appeared to be in his early 30s, with sun-streaked brown hair and a face that was both rugged and kind. He wore well-worn jeans, work boots, and a flannel shirt that had seen better days, and he was staring down at Emma and her unusual family with an expression of complete astonishment. "Ma'am," he said softly, clearly trying not to startle her or wake the babies. "Are you all right?" Emma struggled to sit up, suddenly acutely aware of how she must look after sleeping in a stable. Her long black hair had escaped from its ponytail and hung in tangled waves around her face. Her clothes were wrinkled and stained with baby formula and road dust. Her eyes were probably red-rimmed from exhaustion and tears she'd tried not to shed in front of her children. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My van broke down in the storm last night. I didn't know where else to go." The man's expression softened further as he took in the scene before him. 4 sleeping babies, a protective lamb, and a young mother who looked like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. He crouched down to bring himself to her eye level, moving slowly and deliberately so as not to appear threatening. "I'm Cole Harrison," he said quietly. "This is my ranch. And you don't need to apologize for seeking shelter from a storm." Emma felt tears threatening again at the kindness in his voice. After weeks of running, of being constantly afraid, of feeling like she and her children were completely alone in the world, Cole's gentle tone was almost overwhelming in its simple humanity. "Emma Chen," she managed to say. "These are my babies, Lucy, James, Sophie, and Grace. And this is Clover." Cole's eyes moved over each sleeping child, and Emma saw something shift in his expression, a deepening of concern, a recognition of the vulnerability of her situation. When his gaze settled on Clover, who had relaxed enough to sit but remained alert, a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Clover's quite the guardian," he observed. "She's been with us since she was just a few days old," Emma explained, reaching out to stroke the lamb's soft head. "I bottle-fed her when her mother rejected her." Cole nodded as if this made perfect sense, and Emma felt a small flutter of hope in her chest. Many people would have thought it strange, even crazy, to travel with a lamb, but Cole seemed to understand the bond that had formed between them. "When did you last eat?" Cole asked, his eyes taking in Emma's too thin frame and the dark circles under her eyes. Emma tried to remember. She'd had coffee and a stale donut at a gas station yesterday morning, but before that? The days had blurred together in a haze of driving and feeding babies and trying to stay one step ahead of Marcus and whatever resources he might use to track them down. "I don't remember," she admitted. Cole's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and Emma wondered what he was thinking. Was he angry about the intrusion? Suspicious of her story? Planning to call the authorities? Instead, he stood up and extended his hand to her. "Let's get you and these little ones up to the house," he said. "I've got coffee on, and I can make breakfast while you get your bearings." Emma stared at his outstretched hand, afraid to trust the kindness she saw in his eyes. In her experience, kindness always came with a price, and she had learned to be wary of offers that seemed too good to be true. "I don't want to impose," she said carefully. "If you could just point me toward the nearest town, maybe help me figure out what's wrong with my van." "Ma'am," Cole said gently, "when's the last time those babies had a proper meal? When's the last time you had a shower and a decent night's sleep?" The questions hit Emma like physical blows because she couldn't answer them. She had been so focused on running, on surviving from one hour to the next, that she hadn't stopped to consider what her children truly needed beyond the basic necessities of formula and diaper changes. "I've been managing," she said defensively. "I'm sure you have," Cole replied, and there was no judgment in his voice, only understanding. "But managing and thriving are two different things. You've got 4 babies who need stability, and you need help. There's no shame in accepting it." As if summoned by his words, Grace began to stir, her tiny face scrunching up in preparation for tears. The sound woke James, who immediately began to fuss, which in turn roused Lucy and Sophie. Within seconds, all 4 babies were crying, their voices creating a symphony of need that echoed through the stable. Emma moved automatically, reaching for bottles and checking diapers, but her hands were shaking from exhaustion and the overwhelming nature of caring for 4 infants simultaneously. She had been doing this alone for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone offer to help. Cole watched her struggle for a moment, then quietly moved into the stall and knelt beside her. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward James, who was crying the loudest. Emma hesitated for only a second before nodding. Cole lifted the baby with surprising confidence, cradling him against his chest and beginning to sway gently. To Emma's amazement, James's cries immediately quieted to soft whimpers. "You have experience with babies?" Emma asked, continuing to tend to the other 3. "My sister has 5 kids," Cole explained, still swaying with James. "I've done my share of babysitting over the years, learned that sometimes they just need to feel secure." Emma felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen as she watched this stranger, this kind, gentle stranger, comfort her son with the same care she would have shown. When was the last time someone had helped her with the babies? When was the last time she hadn't felt completely alone in the overwhelming task of caring for them? "There's a carrier in my van," she said suddenly. 4 seats, actually, if you really meant it about breakfast. Cole's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "I really meant it. Let me help you get them settled, and we'll head up to the house." Working together, they managed to get all 4 babies secured in their carriers, along with the diaper bag and Emma's small suitcase. Clover followed beside them as they made their way from the stable to the ranch house, her small hooves clicking against the gravel path. The house was a sprawling log structure that looked like it had grown organically from the landscape around it. A wide porch wrapped around the front, offering views of rolling pastures where cattle grazed in the morning sun. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks touched with snow that glittered in the early light. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, with comfortable furniture that looked like it was meant to be lived in rather than admired. The kitchen was large and functional, with a farmhouse table that could easily seat 8 people and windows that looked out over the ranch's operation. Cole immediately set about making coffee while Emma settled the babies in their carriers around the kitchen table. The familiar sounds and smells of a working kitchen were soothing after weeks of fast food and gas station snacks. Emma found herself relaxing slightly for the first time in memory. "How do you like your eggs?" Cole asked, already pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. "However you're making them is fine," Emma replied, bouncing Grace gently when she began to fuss again. Cole paused in his food preparation and looked at her with those perceptive green eyes. "Emma, you're allowed to have preferences. You're allowed to ask for what you want." The simple statement hit Emma with unexpected force. When was the last time someone had asked her what she wanted? For months before she'd discovered Marcus's betrayal, she had been living his version of her life, wearing the clothes he chose, eating at the restaurants he preferred, socializing with people he selected. Even her pregnancy had been orchestrated according to his timeline and his goals. "Scrambled," she said quietly. "I like them scrambled." Cole smiled as if she'd just given him the most important information in the world. "Scrambled it is." As he cooked, Emma found herself studying her surroundings more carefully. The kitchen was clearly the heart of the home, with evidence of daily life scattered around in the form of newspapers, coffee mugs, and what looked like ranch paperwork stacked on a small desk in the corner. But it was also meticulously clean and organized, suggesting someone who took pride in their living space. "Do you live here alone?" Emma asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. She didn't want Cole to think she was prying, or, worse, that she might be some kind of threat to his privacy or safety. "Just me and my dog, Ranger," Cole replied easily. "He's out checking the herd this morning, but he'll be back soon. He's going to be very interested in Clover." As if hearing her name, the lamb looked up from where she had settled near the baby's carriers. She had positioned herself where she could see all 4 children, her dark eyes alert and protective. "She's amazing with them," Emma said, following Cole's gaze. "Sometimes I think she understands they're vulnerable better than most humans do." "Animals often do," Cole agreed, setting a plate of perfectly scrambled eggs in front of Emma along with toast and fresh coffee. "They don't complicate things with expectations or judgments. They just see what's needed and respond." Emma took her first bite of the eggs and nearly moaned with pleasure. She couldn't remember when food had tasted so good, so real. The eggs were creamy and perfectly seasoned. The toast was homemade bread with butter that tasted like it came from cows she could probably see from the window, and the coffee was strong and rich and exactly what she needed. "This is incredible," she said, taking another eager bite. "Thank you." Cole had made his own plate and sat down across from her, but Emma noticed he was eating slowly, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't uncomfortable. There was nothing predatory or invasive about his attention, but she sensed he was trying to understand her situation without pushing for information she might not be ready to share. "The storm did quite a bit of damage last night," he said conversationally. "Trees down, power lines affected. It might be a day or two before Pete can get out to look at your van." Emma's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Pete?" "Local mechanic. Only one within 50 miles who's worth trusting with a vehicle. But he's been dealing with storm cleanup since dawn." "A day or two." Emma tried to process this information without panicking. A day or two meant staying in one place, meant being stationary and potentially discoverable, but it also meant rest, meant proper food for herself and the babies, meant not having to make desperate decisions while exhausted and afraid. "I have some money," she said quickly. "Not much, but I can pay for the repairs. And if there's a motel nearby." Cole shook his head. "Nearest motel is in Riverside, about 40 miles south. And it's not exactly the kind of place you'd want to stay with 4 babies." Emma felt panic beginning to rise in her chest. She was trapped, dependent on the kindness of a stranger, with no resources and no backup plan. Marcus could have people looking for her by now. There could be alerts out, missing person reports, anything that might lead him to her location. As if sensing her distress, Sophie began to cry, which immediately set off Grace. Within moments, all 4 babies were wailing again, their voices creating a wall of sound that made Emma's head throb and her heart race. "I'm sorry," she said, standing quickly and trying to tend to all 4 at once. "They're not usually this fussy. It's just been a long few weeks, and they're probably picking up on my stress." "Emma." Cole's voice cut through her frantic explanations, calm and steady. "It's okay. They're babies. Babies cry. No one's judging you or them." But Emma was beyond rational thought now, caught in the grip of the anxiety that had been her constant companion for weeks. She moved frantically between the carriers, trying to soothe 4 crying infants simultaneously while Clover paced nervously around the kitchen table. "I should go," Emma said, her voice rising with panic. "I shouldn't have come here. This was a mistake. I just need to get my van fixed and we'll be out of your way." "Emma." Cole stood up and moved around the table, his presence steady and calming even as Emma fell apart. "Look at me." She forced herself to meet his eyes, expecting to see irritation or regret or the desire to be rid of her and her complicated situation. Instead, she saw only kindness and understanding. "You're safe here," he said simply. "You and your babies and Clover. Whatever you're running from, whatever has you so scared, it can't reach you here. Not on my land, not in my home." Emma felt tears streaming down her face as the weight of weeks of fear and exhaustion finally overwhelmed her defenses. She sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands, as sobs shook her entire body. Cole moved with quiet efficiency, somehow managing to pick up Lucy and James while still keeping an eye on Sophie and Grace. His presence seemed to calm all four babies, their cries fading to soft whimpers and then to the kind of sleepy contentment that Emma had been desperately trying to achieve for weeks. "How?" she whispered through her tears. "How do you make it look so easy?" "Practice," Cole said gently, settling into his chair with a baby in each arm. "And the fact that I'm not carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders like you are." Emma wiped her eyes and looked at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she hadn't even known she was praying. He was holding her children with the same care she would show them, his large hands gentle and sure as he supported their small bodies. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. "I thought I did, but I don't. I just knew I had to get them away from their father, and now I don't know where we're going or what we're going to do when we get there." Cole was quiet for a long moment, his attention apparently focused on the babies in his arms. But Emma could sense him thinking, processing what she had revealed about her situation. "Their father," he said carefully. "He's the reason you're running?" Emma nodded, unable to trust her voice to explain the full scope of Marcus's betrayal without breaking down completely again. "And you don't feel safe going back to him?" Another nod, this one accompanied by a shudder that Emma couldn't suppress. Cole's jaw tightened, and Emma saw something hard and protective flash in his green eyes. "Then you don't go back to him," he said firmly. "Ever." The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction that her safety and her children's safety mattered, made Emma's tears flow again. But these were different tears. Tears of relief rather than despair. Tears of gratitude rather than fear. "I can't ask you to get involved in this," she said. "You don't even know me. I could be anyone, could be lying about everything." Cole looked down at the babies in his arms, then at Clover, who had settled contentedly at his feet, then back at Emma. Anyone who would travel with a lamb to protect it, who would risk everything to keep her children safe, who would sleep in a stranger's stable rather than compromise her family's security. That's not just anyone. That's someone worth helping. Emma stared at him, trying to understand how this man could see so clearly into her heart when she had been living with someone for years who had never truly seen her at all. Cole was offering her something she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. Unconditional support, with no strings attached and no hidden agenda. "I don't know how long it will take to figure out our next steps," she said carefully. "And I can't pay you much for room and board." "Emma," Cole interrupted gently. "Stop thinking about this like a business transaction. You need help. I can provide it. Sometimes it really is that simple." As if to underscore his point, Grace let out a soft sigh of contentment in his arms, her tiny fist curling around his finger in the universal gesture of infant trust. Emma felt her last resistance crumble as she watched her daughter, her cautious, often difficult daughter, relax completely in the arms of this kind stranger. "Just until Pete can fix the van," she said quietly. Cole smiled, and Emma felt something warm and hopeful bloom in her chest for the first time in months. "Just until then," he agreed. But as Emma looked around the warm kitchen, at her children peaceful in Cole's arms, at Clover settled contentedly on the floor, she found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, this was where their running was meant to end. The first week at Cole's ranch passed like a dream Emma was afraid to wake from. Each morning she would find herself surprised by the absence of panic, by the gentle sounds of cattle lowing in the distance instead of the constant hum of traffic and sirens that had been the soundtrack to her life in Denver. The babies seemed to sense the change in their environment, too, sleeping more soundly and crying less frequently than they had during their desperate flight across state lines. Cole had converted his home office into a makeshift nursery, with an efficiency that left Emma both grateful and slightly overwhelmed. He'd driven into town and returned with 4 portable cribs, a changing table, and enough baby supplies to stock a small store. When Emma had protested about the expense, he'd simply shrugged and said that his sister had warned him about the importance of being prepared when babies were involved. "Rebecca has very strong opinions about child rearing," he'd explained while assembling the cribs with the focused concentration of a man who clearly understood the importance of following directions exactly. She'll never forgive me if I let you change diapers on the kitchen table." The mention of his sister had made Emma curious about Cole's family, but she'd learned that he volunteered information slowly and only when it felt natural to the conversation. She was beginning to understand that this was simply his way. He was a man who believed in actions rather than words, who showed care through gestures rather than grand declarations. Clover had adapted to ranch life with an ease that surprised everyone, including Cole. The lamb had claimed a spot on the front porch where she could survey the ranch's activities while still keeping watch over the babies inside. Cole's border collie Ranger had initially been suspicious of the woolly interloper, but within days the two animals had formed an unlikely partnership, with Ranger teaching Clover the boundaries of the property and Clover providing companionship during the long hours when Cole was working in the fields. Emma found herself settling into a routine that felt both foreign and natural. She would wake before dawn with the babies, feed them while Cole prepared breakfast, then spend the morning hours exploring the ranch while he tended to his cattle. The afternoons were for naps and quiet activities, and the evenings were for conversations on the porch that stretched long into the Wyoming night. It was during one of these evening conversations that Emma first began to understand the depth of Cole's connection to his land. They were sitting on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of coral and gold, while the babies slept peacefully in their carriers beside them. Clover was grazing in the yard, her white wool glowing in the fading light, and Ranger lay stretched out on the porch steps like a guardian watching over them all. "My great-grandfather homesteaded this land in 1887, Cole said, his voice carrying the quiet pride of a man who understood the weight of legacy. He came west with nothing but a wagon, a team of oxen, and a pregnant wife who thought he was completely insane for leaving civilization behind. Emma shifted slightly in the swing, adjusting Grace's position in her arms. The baby had been fussy all day, fighting sleep with the determination of someone who refused to miss anything interesting happening around her. Did she ever forgive him? Cole smiled, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the last rays of sunlight were disappearing behind the mountains. According to family legend, she forgave him the first morning she stepped out onto this porch and saw the sun rise over land that belonged to them. She said she'd never seen anything so beautiful in her life, and she couldn't imagine living anywhere else. Emma followed his gaze, taking in the vast expanse of grassland that stretched toward the mountains, broken only by the occasional cluster of cattle or the winding line of the creek that provided water for the ranch. There was something about the scale of it, the sense of space and possibility, that made her chest feel lighter than it had in months. "I can understand that," she said softly. "There's something about this place that makes you feel like you can breathe again." Cole turned to look at her, his green eyes studying her face with an intensity that made Emma's heart skip unexpectedly. "Is that what you were missing in Denver? Room to breathe?" The question was asked gently, without pressure, but Emma could sense Cole's genuine curiosity about her past. She had shared bits and pieces of her story over the past week, but always in general terms, always keeping the most painful details locked away where they couldn't hurt her children or complicate their temporary sanctuary. "I thought I had everything I wanted," Emma said, her fingers automatically stroking Grace's soft hair. "A successful husband, a beautiful home, social standing, security. It looked perfect from the outside." "But?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, listening to the sound of cicadas beginning their evening chorus and the distant lowing of cattle settling in for the night. She had been asking herself the same question for weeks, trying to understand how she had lost herself so completely in a life that had never really been hers. "But I disappeared," she said finally. "Somewhere along the way, I stopped being Emma and became Mrs. Marcus Chen, mother of the miracle babies, the perfect wife who smiled for every camera and never asked inconvenient questions. I was so busy being who everyone expected me to be that I forgot who I actually was." Cole nodded as if her words made perfect sense to him. "It's easy to lose yourself when everyone around you has opinions about who you should be." There was something in his tone that made Emma suspect he was speaking from experience, but before she could ask, James began to stir in his carrier, making the soft sounds that meant he would be fully awake and demanding attention within minutes. "I should get them inside," Emma said, starting to rise from the swing. Cole stood as well, automatically reaching for Lucy's carrier, while Emma gathered James and Sophie. It was a routine they had developed without discussion, this shared responsibility for the baby's care that felt as natural as breathing. As they moved through the evening ritual of baths and bottles and bedtime stories, Emma found herself marveling at how seamlessly Cole had integrated into their lives. He seemed to understand instinctively which baby needed what kind of attention, remembering that Sophie preferred to be swaddled tightly while Grace liked her arms free, that James would only take his bottle if he could see his sisters, that Lucy needed constant contact to settle down for sleep. "You're going to make an amazing father someday," Emma said as they finished tucking the babies into their cribs. Cole paused in the act of adjusting James's blanket, his expression suddenly guarded. "I don't know about that." Something in his tone warned Emma that she had touched on a sensitive topic, but her curiosity was stronger than her caution. "You don't want children?" Cole moved toward the door, gesturing for Emma to follow him into the hallway where they could talk without waking the babies. "It's not that I don't want them," he said quietly. "It's that I'm not sure I'd be good at the permanence of it all." Emma frowned, thinking of all the ways Cole had proven his natural ability with her children over the past week. "What do you mean?" Cole leaned against the hallway wall, his arms crossed over his chest in a posture that Emma was beginning to recognize as his way of protecting himself from vulnerability. "People leave, Emma. They decide they want something different, something more exciting, something that doesn't involve getting up before dawn to feed cattle and fix fences. I've learned not to count on anyone staying." The pain in his voice was carefully controlled, but Emma could hear it underneath the matter-of-fact words. She wanted to ask who had left him, who had hurt him badly enough that he believed love was temporary, but she sensed that pushing for details would only make him retreat further. "Some people leave," she said gently, "but some people stay. Some people find exactly what they've been looking for and fight to keep it." Cole looked at her for a long moment, his green eyes searching her face as if trying to determine whether she truly believed what she was saying. "Is that what you're doing here, Emma? Fighting to keep something?" The question caught Emma off guard, forcing her to confront feelings she had been trying not to examine too closely. Over the past week, she had told herself that her growing contentment was simply relief at being safe, that her awareness of Cole's every gesture and expression was just gratitude for his kindness. But standing in the hallway of his home, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of her children sleeping and the familiar scent of his cologne, she could no longer deny the truth. She was falling in love with Cole Harrison. She was falling in love with his quiet strength, his gentle hands, his way of seeing straight to the heart of things without judgment or expectation. She was falling in love with the life they had created together over the past week, the sense of partnership and shared purpose that felt more real than anything she had experienced in her marriage. But loving Cole meant risking everything she had fought to protect. It meant considering the possibility of staying in Wyoming, of building a life that had nothing to do with running away, and everything to do with moving towards something better. It meant trusting that this man, who had already shown her more kindness than she had known was possible, might be willing to take on not just her, but her complicated history, and her 4 children, and her lamb, and all the messy realities that came with loving someone who was still technically married to someone else. "I don't know," Emma admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I'm fighting for anymore, or even if I have the right to fight for it." Cole pushed away from the wall and took a step closer to her, close enough that Emma could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Why wouldn't you have the right?" Emma thought of Marcus, of the marriage certificate that still legally bound her to a man who had betrayed everything she thought they shared. She thought of the scandal that would follow her wherever she went, the questions that would be asked about her sudden disappearance and the circumstances that had led to it. She thought of the investigation that was probably still ongoing, the legal complications that could arise from her decision to disappear with the children. "Because I'm still married," she said, the words feeling like stones in her mouth. "Because I abandoned my life without explanation. Because I don't even know if what I did was legal. Taking the children away from their father like that." Cole was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Emma braced herself for his withdrawal, for the moment when he would realize that helping her might have legal implications he hadn't considered. Instead, he reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch so tender that Emma felt tears spring to her eyes. "Emma, any man who would put his children at risk for his own gain forfeits his right to call himself their father. Any husband who would treat his wife like a business asset forfeits his right to claim her loyalty. You didn't abandon your life. You saved it. The conviction in his voice, the absolute certainty that she had done the right thing, made Emma's knees weak with relief. For weeks, she had been second-guessing every decision, wondering if she had overreacted, if she had let fear and anger cloud her judgment. But Cole's words gave her the permission she hadn't known she needed to trust her own instincts. "I'm scared," she whispered, the admission feeling both terrifying and liberating. "Of what?" Emma looked toward the nursery where her children slept peacefully, then back at Cole's face, which was patient and understanding and everything she had never known she needed. "Of wanting this too much. Of letting myself believe that we could actually have a life here, that you could actually care about us enough to want us to stay permanently." Cole's hand moved to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Emma, I've been hoping you'd want to stay since the moment I found you in my stable. These past days, watching you with your children, seeing how you care for Clover, the way you've brought life and laughter into this house, it's shown me what I didn't even know I was missing." Emma searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation, but found only honesty and hope, and something that looked remarkably like love. "But the complications, the legal issues, the fact that I come with so much baggage. Everyone has baggage, Emma. The question is whether you're willing to help each other carry it." Before Emma could respond, Cole leaned down and kissed her, his lips soft and warm and tasting of the coffee they had shared on the porch. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and respectful, but it conveyed more emotion than all the passionate encounters Emma had experienced in her marriage. This kiss was about possibility and hope, and the courage to believe in something better. When they finally broke apart, Emma felt like she was seeing the world with new eyes. The hallway of Cole's house no longer felt like a temporary refuge, but like the beginning of home. The sound of her children breathing peacefully in the next room no longer felt like a burden she was carrying alone, but like a joy she was sharing with someone who understood their value. "I want to stay," she said, the words coming out in a rush before she could lose her nerve. "Not just until Pete fixes the van. Not just until I figure out my next move. I want to stay and build a life here. With you, if you'll have us." Cole's smile was like sunrise, transforming his entire face and making Emma's heart race with possibility. "Emma Chen, I would be honored to have you and your babies and Clover as part of this ranch, part of this family." The word family hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and potential. Emma had thought she understood what family meant, but standing in Cole's hallway with his arms around her and her children sleeping safely nearby, she realized she was just beginning to learn. The next morning brought the first real test of their newfound commitment to each other. Emma was feeding Sophie her morning bottle when Cole's cell phone rang, the shrill sound cutting through the peaceful atmosphere of breakfast time. Cole glanced at the caller ID and frowned, his expression immediately becoming guarded. "I need to take this," he said, stepping out onto the porch. Emma could hear the low murmur of his voice through the window, but couldn't make out the words. Whatever the conversation was about, it was clearly serious. Cole's posture was tense, his free hand running through his hair in a gesture Emma was beginning to recognize as his way of dealing with stress. When he returned to the kitchen 10 minutes later, his expression was carefully neutral, but Emma could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his jaw was set. "Everything okay?" she asked, shifting Grace to her other arm while keeping an eye on the other 3 babies. Cole poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, taking longer than necessary to add cream and sugar. "That was my ex-wife," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. Emma felt her stomach drop. In all their conversations about past relationships and future possibilities, Cole had never mentioned being married before. The revelation hit her like a physical blow, making her question everything she thought she understood about their situation. "Your ex-wife?" she managed to say, trying to keep her voice steady. Cole sat down across from her, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug as if seeking warmth. "Her name is Jessica. We divorced 3 years ago." Emma waited for him to continue, her mind racing with questions she wasn't sure she had the right to ask. If Cole had been married before, why hadn't he mentioned it? What had caused the divorce? And most importantly, why was his ex-wife calling him now, just when Emma had finally allowed herself to hope for a future with him? "She's moving back to Riverside," Cole continued, his eyes fixed on his coffee rather than meeting Emma's gaze. She got a job at the hospital there, and she wants to reconnect. The word reconnect hung in the air like a challenge, and Emma felt her newfound security beginning to crumble. She thought about what Cole had said the night before, about people leaving, about not counting on anyone staying. Had Jessica been the one who had taught him that lesson? And if she was coming back, what did that mean for Emma and her children? Reconnect how? Emma asked, proud that her voice remained steady despite the turmoil in her chest. Cole finally looked up, and Emma saw pain and confusion in his green eyes. I don't know. She was deliberately vague about her intentions. She just said she'd made a mistake leaving, and she wanted a chance to talk about the possibility of starting over. Emma felt like she had been punched in the stomach. Just when she had found the courage to believe in love again, just when she had allowed herself to imagine a future filled with possibility, the past was reaching out to reclaim what she had thought was hers. What did you tell her? Emma asked, dreading the answer but needing to know. Cole was quiet for a long moment, his expression troubled. I told her that my life was complicated right now, that I had responsibilities I couldn't ignore. But she's persistent, Emma. She always has been. She's planning to drive out here this weekend to see the ranch again, to talk about what went wrong between us. Emma nodded, trying to process this information rationally despite the emotional chaos in her chest. She had no claim on Cole beyond the week they had shared and the feelings that had developed between them. If his ex-wife wanted to reconcile, if Cole still had feelings for the woman he had once loved enough to marry, then Emma had no right to stand in their way. But the thought of leaving, of packing up her children and Clover and returning to the uncertainty and fear they had known before finding Cole's ranch, made her feel physically ill. In just 1 week, this place had become more of a home than anywhere she had ever lived. Cole had become more of a partner than Marcus had ever been. The life they had begun to build together felt more real and valuable than anything she had left behind in Denver. I should go, Emma said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Before she gets here. It would be awkward for everyone if I was still here when she arrives. Cole's head snapped up, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. No, he said firmly. Emma, you're not going anywhere. This is your home now, remember? We talked about this last night. That was before I knew your ex-wife was coming back, Emma replied, standing up and beginning to clear the breakfast dishes with sharp, jerky movements that betrayed her emotional state. Everything's different now. Cole stood as well, moving around the table to catch Emma's hands in his, stilling her frantic activity. Nothing's different. Jessica showing up doesn't change how I feel about you, about us. Emma looked into his eyes, searching for certainty but finding only the same confusion and conflict she was feeling herself. How can you say that? You were married to her, Cole. You loved her enough to promise her forever. If she wants to try again. Then she's 3 years too late, Cole said, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. Emma, Jessica left me. She decided that ranch life wasn't exciting enough, that I wasn't ambitious enough, that she wanted something more sophisticated than what I could offer her. She made her choice, and now I've made mine. Emma wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the connection they had built over the past week was strong enough to withstand the challenge of his ex-wife's return. But she had learned the hard way that love wasn't always enough, that people could change their minds and walk away from even the most sacred promises. What if seeing her again changes how you feel? Emma asked, voicing her deepest fear. What if you realize you still love her? Cole cupped Emma's face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. Emma, I know the difference between love and habit, between missing someone and missing the idea of them. What Jessica and I had was comfortable, familiar, but it was never this. This? Cole's thumb traced the curve of Emma's cheek, his touch gentle and reverent. This feeling like I've been holding my breath for years and can finally exhale. This sense that everything in my life was just preparation for meeting you and your children. This certainty that I would rather fight for something real and complicated than settle for something easy and empty. Emma felt tears streaming down her face, torn between hope and fear, between the desire to trust Cole's words and the need to protect herself and her children from further heartbreak. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I, Cole admitted. But I'm more scared of losing you than I am of facing Jessica. Stay, Emma. Let me prove to you that what we have is worth fighting for. Before Emma could respond, a sharp knock on the front door interrupted their conversation. Cole frowned, glancing at the clock on the kitchen wall. "I'm not expecting anyone." Emma felt her blood turn to ice as paranoid thoughts raced through her mind. What if Marcus had found them? What if someone had recognized her or the babies and reported their location? What if their week of peace and safety was about to come to a crashing end? Cole must have seen the fear in her eyes because he immediately moved into protective mode, his body positioning itself between Emma and the door. "Stay here with the babies," he said quietly. "Let me see who it is." Emma gathered the 4 carriers closer to her, her hands shaking as she tried to comfort the babies who had begun to sense the tension in the room. Clover appeared in the kitchen doorway, her dark eyes alert and concerned, positioning herself between Emma and whatever threat might be approaching. Emma could hear Cole's voice at the front door, low and careful, followed by a woman's voice that was unfamiliar but carried a tone of authority that made Emma's stomach clench with dread. The conversation seemed to go on forever, punctuated by long silences that Emma filled with increasingly dire possibilities. When Cole finally returned to the kitchen, his expression was grim, but not panicked, which gave Emma a small measure of relief. Behind him walked a woman in her 50s wearing a business suit and carrying a briefcase that immediately identified her as some kind of official. "Emma," Cole said carefully, "this is Detective Sarah Martinez from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. She'd like to ask you some questions about your husband." Emma felt the world tilt around her as she realized that her worst fears were coming true. Somehow, despite all her precautions, Marcus had found them. The week of peace and safety had been an illusion, and now she would have to face the consequences of her decision to run. Detective Martinez stepped forward, her expression professional but not unkind. "Mrs. Chen, I want to assure you that you're not in any trouble. We're investigating your husband's business practices, and we believe you may have information that could help us build our case against him." Emma stared at the detective, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. "You're investigating Marcus?" "We've been building a case against Dr. Chen for several months," Detective Martinez explained, settling into the chair Cole offered her. "We have evidence of fraud, illegal human experimentation, and violation of numerous medical ethics guidelines. What we need is someone who can testify about his methods, someone who was directly affected by his actions." Emma felt a strange mixture of vindication and terror as she realized that her instincts about Marcus had been correct, that the evidence she had discovered was part of a larger pattern of criminal behavior. But she also understood that cooperating with the investigation would mean exposing herself and her children to scrutiny they might not be able to handle. "I don't know if I can help you," Emma said quietly, her protective instincts warring with her desire for justice. "I have my children to think about." Detective Martinez nodded understandingly. "Mrs. Chen, I know this is overwhelming, but I want you to know that Dr. Chen has been using his search for you and the children as a way to generate sympathy and deflect attention from his crimes. He's been portraying himself as a devoted father whose wife had a mental breakdown and kidnapped his children." Emma felt rage building in her chest at the thought of Marcus manipulating public opinion to serve his own purposes, using their children's welfare as a shield against the consequences of his actions. "That's not what happened." "We know that," Detective Martinez said gently, "but we need someone who can testify to the truth, someone who can explain why you felt you had no choice but to leave with the children." Emma looked at Cole, who was standing behind the detective with his arms crossed, his expression protective and supportive. She thought about the life they had begun to build together, the sense of safety and belonging she had found at his ranch. If she agreed to testify against Marcus, would she be putting all of that at risk? "What would happen to my children if I cooperate with your investigation?" Emma asked, forcing herself to focus on the practical implications rather than her emotional fears. "That would depend on several factors," Detective Martinez replied honestly. "If Dr. Chen is convicted, he would likely lose his parental rights. You would need to file for divorce and establish legal custody, but given the circumstances, I don't think you would have any trouble doing so." Emma felt a flutter of hope in her chest at the thought of being legally free from Marcus, of being able to protect her children without constantly looking over her shoulder. But she also understood that the legal process would be long and complicated, requiring her to relive the worst moments of her marriage in public testimony. "I need time to think about this," Emma said finally. Detective Martinez nodded and pulled a business card from her briefcase. Of course. But Mrs. Chen, I want you to know that you're not alone in this. There are other victims of your husband's crimes, other people who are willing to testify. Your voice could be the one that ensures he can't hurt anyone else. After the detective left, Emma found herself sitting on the porch swing with Cole, watching Clover graze in the yard while the babies napped inside. The peaceful scene felt surreal after the morning's revelations, and Emma struggled to reconcile the tranquility of ranch life with the legal and emotional complexities that were suddenly demanding her attention. "What are you thinking?" Cole asked quietly, his arm around Emma's shoulders providing both comfort and strength. Emma leaned into his warmth, grateful for his steady presence in the midst of her turmoil. "I'm thinking that I want Marcus to pay for what he did, but I'm terrified of what it might cost us to make that happen." Cole was quiet for a moment, his fingers gently stroking Emma's hair. "What are you most afraid of?" Emma considered the question, trying to identify the source of her anxiety among the tangle of fears and hopes in her chest. "I'm afraid that if I testify, if I become part of a public legal case, it will make it impossible for us to have a normal life here. I'm afraid that the media attention and the legal complications will drive you away, that you'll decide it's too much trouble to be involved with someone who comes with so much drama." Cole turned slightly in the swing so he could look directly at Emma, his green eyes serious and intent. "Emma, do you remember what I told you about my great-grandmother? About how she forgave my great-grandfather for bringing her west because she realized she had found something worth the risk?" Emma nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. "That's how I feel about you," Cole continued. "Whatever complications come with loving you, whatever challenges we have to face together, it's worth it, because you and your children have brought something to my life that I didn't even know I was missing." Emma felt tears streaming down her face as she finally allowed herself to believe that Cole's feelings for her were strong enough to withstand the tests that lay ahead. Even if it means dealing with lawyers and reporters and all the mess that comes with taking on someone like Marcus? Cole's smile was gentle but determined. "Emma, my great-grandfather faced down claim jumpers, drought, harsh winters, and financial ruin to build this ranch. I think I can handle a few reporters and lawyers if it means protecting the woman I love and helping her get the justice she deserves." The word love hung in the air between them, the first time either of them had spoken it aloud. Emma felt her heart swell with a happiness so intense it was almost painful, a sense of rightness that made everything else seem manageable. "I love you too," she whispered, reaching up to touch Cole's face with wonder. "I love you, and I love this life we're building together. I want to fight for it, no matter what it takes." Cole kissed her then, a kiss that tasted of promises and determination and the kind of love that could weather any storm. When they finally broke apart, Emma felt stronger than she had in months, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead as long as she didn't have to face them alone. "So what do we do about Jessica?" Emma asked, suddenly remembering the other complication that had seemed so overwhelming just hours earlier. Cole's expression grew thoughtful. "We tell her the truth. That I've moved on, that I've found something real and lasting, and that while I wish her well, there's no going back to what we used to have." Emma nodded, feeling a sense of clarity that surprised her with its strength. "And what do we do about Detective Martinez?" Cole stood up from the swing and extended his hand to Emma, pulling her to her feet beside him. "We call her back and tell her that you're ready to testify, that you're ready to make sure Marcus can't hurt anyone else the way he hurt you." As they walked back into the house hand in hand, Emma felt like she was finally walking toward something instead of running away from it. There would be challenges ahead, difficult conversations and legal proceedings, and the inevitable media attention that would come with taking on a prominent figure like Marcus. But she would face all of it with Cole beside her, in the home they were building together on land that had sheltered his family for generations. Inside the house, the babies were beginning to stir from their naps, their soft sounds a reminder of everything Emma was fighting to protect. As she and Cole moved together to tend to their needs, Emma marveled at how natural their partnership had become, how seamlessly they had learned to share the responsibilities and joys of caring for 4 small lives. This was what family looked like, Emma realized. Not the carefully constructed image she had maintained in Denver, not the performance of happiness for public consumption, but this quiet, everyday commitment to showing up for each other no matter what challenges arose. As if sensing her thoughts, Clover appeared in the nursery doorway, her dark eyes watching as Emma and Cole changed diapers and prepared bottles. The lamb had become an integral part of their makeshift family, a bridge between Emma's past and her future, a reminder that sometimes the most unlikely combinations could create something beautiful and lasting. "Are you ready for whatever comes next?" Cole asked as they settled in the living room for the baby's afternoon feeding. Emma looked around at the scene that had become so precious to her. Cole cradling James and Lucy while she tended to Sophie and Grace. Clover settled contentedly at their feet, Ranger keeping watch from his favorite spot by the fireplace. This was worth fighting for, worth facing down Marcus and his lawyers and whatever other obstacles lay ahead. "I'm ready," Emma said, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she truly meant it. 3 months later, Emma stood in the federal courthouse in Denver, her hand resting protectively on her rounded belly as she prepared to deliver the testimony that would finally bring Marcus to justice. The pregnancy had been unexpected but welcomed, a symbol of the new life she and Cole were building together. Beside her, Cole squeezed her other hand, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of media attention and legal proceedings. The courtroom was packed with reporters, victims of Marcus's experimental treatments, and legal professionals who had worked tirelessly to build the case against him. Emma's quadruplets sat quietly in the gallery with Cole's sister Rebecca, who had driven down from Montana to help care for them during the trial. Even Clover was there, having become something of a mascot for the prosecution team after Detective Martinez had learned about the Lamb's role in Emma's escape. As Emma took the witness stand, she caught sight of Marcus at the defendant's table. He looked smaller than she remembered, his usually perfect appearance disheveled, and his confident demeanor replaced by barely contained desperation. When their eyes met, she felt nothing but pity for the man who had once controlled every aspect of her life. "Mrs. Harrison," the prosecutor began, using Emma's new married name with deliberate emphasis, "can you tell us about the night you discovered your husband's illegal activities?" Emma had practiced this testimony dozens of times, but speaking the truth in public still felt like shedding a weight she had carried for years. She described finding the hidden files, learning about the unauthorized experiments, discovering that her own children had been subjects in Marcus's research. Her voice never wavered, even when Marcus's defense attorney tried to paint her as an unstable woman who had kidnapped her own children. "And what made you decide to leave that night?" the prosecutor continued. Emma's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where Cole's child grew safely inside her. "I realized that my children weren't safe with their father, that staying would make me complicit in his crimes. I had to choose between the life I thought I wanted and the family I knew I needed to protect." The testimony took 2 days, during which Emma detailed Marcus's manipulation, his exploitation of their children for publicity, and his complete disregard for medical ethics. Other witnesses corroborated her story, including several women who had suffered complications from Marcus's experimental fertility treatments. When the verdict came back guilty on all counts, Emma felt a profound sense of closure. Marcus would serve 15 years in federal prison and lose his medical license permanently. More importantly, he would never again have any legal claim to the children he had viewed as experiments rather than human beings. Outside the courthouse, Emma and Cole were surrounded by reporters asking about their plans for the future. Cole handled the questions with the same steady confidence he brought to everything else, explaining that they intended to return to Wyoming and focus on raising their family away from public scrutiny. "Mrs. Harrison," one reporter called out, "do you have any regrets about leaving your old life behind?" Emma looked at Cole, then at her children being lovingly tended by Rebecca, then at Clover, who waited patiently by the courthouse steps. "No regrets," she said firmly. "Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you actually need." 6 months later, Emma stood on the porch of their ranch house watching Cole teach Lucy and James how to bottle feed a newborn calf while Sophie and Grace played nearby with Clover. Their son, David, slept peacefully in her arms, his tiny fist wrapped around her finger in the universal gesture of trust. The ranch had prospered under their joint management, with Emma's business background complementing Cole's agricultural expertise. They had expanded into organic beef production and started a small agritourism operation that attracted families wanting to experience authentic ranch life. The stable where Emma had first taken shelter had been converted into a visitor center, with a plaque commemorating the night that changed everything. Jessica had visited once, shortly after the trial, ostensibly to congratulate Cole on his marriage, but really to satisfy her curiosity about the woman who had captured his heart. She had stayed for dinner, played with the quadruplets, and left with a grudging respect for Emma, and a clear understanding that Cole's affections were permanently settled. "The evening star's coming out," Cole said, joining Emma on the porch after settling the children for the night. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands covering hers where they rested on David's sleeping form. Emma leaned back against his chest, marveling at how completely her life had transformed since that desperate night when she had sought shelter in his stable. "Hard to believe it's only been a year since I stumbled into your barn." "Best night of my life," Cole murmured against her hair, "even if I didn't know it at the time." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the Wyoming sky fill with stars, while Clover grazed contentedly in the yard, and Ranger kept his faithful watch from the porch steps. Inside the house, 4 toddlers slept peacefully in beds that would always be theirs, in rooms that would always welcome them home. Emma had learned that sometimes the greatest adventures begin when you're brave enough to let go of the life you planned and embrace the life that's waiting for you. Even if that life starts with sleeping in a stranger's stable with quadruplets and a lamb, trusting that morning will bring the cowboy who says stay and means forever. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.